Hello guys, welcome to our show. Today we discuss about building innovative products that can compete with big brands, and I'm excited to discuss this topic with Damian. How are you?
I'm great, Anatoly. Nice to talk to you today.
Yeah, when I check out your profile on LinkedIn, Damian Rollinson, I found that you have extended experience. Can you tell more about your experience, background, and why you decided to share with us about building innovative products?
Yeah, sure. I'll try to make the story short rather than long. I have been in the local search industry for about 16 years now. I always remember that because my daughter was born in the spring of the same year that I started in local, and so she's 16 now, and so am I in a way. And back in that era, local SEO was basically in its infancy. It didn't really exist as an industry, except for a couple of companies who were kind of starting to wake up to the fact that consumers were starting to turn to Google Maps and other services. All of them were still very new, and businesses needed a way to kind of manage their presence online. And it was just the beginning of a shift where there's been a lot of evolution since then, the beginning of a shift where before around 2005, when Google Maps launched, a business marketed itself using its own website, right? And this was about local
Mhm.
businesses, about large corporations. Obviously, that's still true to some extent. But every year since then, they've lost a little bit of ground, right? And within the last couple of years, I'm sure you're aware of the research that Rand Fishkin has done. I know he was on your show actually, around zero click search, right? And so
Yeah.
he did the two studies in a row, and the first one showed that Google zero click search was above 50%, and then he did it again, and it was above 66%. And so that's the story of the local search industry, as well as many other industries, where Google has basically eaten more and more and more and more market share. And what that ends up meaning for a business that's trying to market themselves is it's a lot less important, still important, but it's kind of secondary importance to market your business using your own native managed properties, your own website, and much more important to make sure that these kind of storefronts on the internet, your Google business profile, your Facebook page, your Yelp profile, all these other outposts, that they're properly optimized, that they're able to convert more traffic, that they're ranked as highly as they can be. And that becomes more and more competitive over time. Google's not standing still. Other sites are kind of trying to follow suit to some extent and introduce new features as well. And so what it means to be competitive in those channels is, that you're really kind of paying attention to the latest developments and so on. And so, back in the day, one of the early companies that I worked with was called Universal Business Listing. And that was one of the first companies that had a local SEO offering of any kind. And it was at a time when citation building was the key to ranking in local, which basically just meant build an instance of yourself on as many third-party directories and sites as you possibly can. And so this company, all we sold was a service that gets you listed in these big, in the directories of these big companies called data aggregators. At the time, it was Info USA and Axiom and companies like that would then license data to Google, right, and to City Search and MapQuest and YP.com and all these sites that consumers used to use in great numbers. And just by going through that data aggregator channel and getting all those citations created, you were able to actually rank really well in local. But that's not true anymore. Now it's much more about having direct API connections into Google and really kind of knowing what you're doing, being able to solve problems when they occur. And the company that I work for now, Soshi, we focus exclusively on multi-location brands. So this is chains and franchises, restaurants, retail stores, grocery stores, banks, basically any vertical you can think of, as long as it's kind of B2C brick and mortar type of a vertical. And so we try to solve these problems at a larger scale. So typically our clients are going to have from 100 locations, maybe 1,000 locations. At the high end, it's many thousands of locations. And so they've got to make sure, hours of operation are up to date across all of their properties, or they've got, the right kinds of photo content, or they're managing their reviews. So it's a very complex problem to solve, but we've kind of solved it with a combination of technology plus expertise.
Love it, love it. By the way, we have a sponsor today, Ahrefs, SEO tools and resources to grow your search traffic. It's well-known tool.
Yep.
And can you tell more about difference between local SEO and international SEO or national SEO? Because I see when webmasters are using the same methods to promote local websites, but they have local intent, some difference. Can you tell more about this difference?
Yeah, absolutely. So local SEO it's correct to think of it as a kind of a subset or a niche within SEO generally, but there are some significant differences. I don't actually really think of myself as an SEO person, although I tangentially, one picks up a lot of things about SEO. But if you ask me to do like an SEO audit of Nike's website or something like that, that's not what you want to hire me to do. It's a different area of focus. And from a Google perspective, sometimes it bothers me that we only ever talk about Google, but of course they are kind of the definition of that universe. From a Google perspective, the algorithms are different algorithms. So there's the main, what they call the core algorithm that drives search results for organic, which is your website and every other website competing for whatever traffic they're competing for. And those are managed in a specific way. We kind of know, although nobody knows, at the end of the day, exactly how the algorithm works. There's a lot of information about the Google quality raters. You can read their guidelines. You can see what kinds of things Google looks for. And then there's, the sort of basic ranking algorithm, and then all of the improvements that have been made to that over time. Probably the most significant one being the introduction of the knowledge graph, plus all the different machine learning components that are being used today. It's good to have an understanding of all of that stuff. And where it applies for us has mostly to do with competing for local intent searches within organic, right? So that's your small business website, or from a multi-location perspective, that means building out local landing pages for every store location that are properly optimized in terms of page load speed, that have schema markup is a big deal for us because schema.org defines a bunch of different schema types for local businesses. There's dozens of them depending on which category you fall into, and they have different kinds of fields that you can fill out. Restaurants can include menus and things like that. So having proper schema markup on your pages, and lots of other bells and whistles that have to do with typical SEO. But for most businesses, they're not going to rank well in organic for a search for Mexican restaurants near me or anything else like that, right? Unless the market's really small or the competition is, not there. Mostly you're going to rank in local. And then the organic ranking is kind of a support to that. So you want your organic ranking to be as strong as it can be, but really you're focused on that sort of local algorithm. And so again, it's managed separately. It has a different kind of logic, and it's driven by, according to Google, and they have a pretty informative help page that talks about how to improve your local ranking in Google that you can look up. It's three main factors. It's distance, relevance, and prominence. And the first two are kind of easier to understand. The third one is a little more complicated. So distance basically is proximity. So if I'm searching from my phone, the results that I see are going to be prioritized according to how close physically that business is to where I'm standing, right? And if I'm on my desktop, my laptop, Google's going to do the best it can to judge from my IP address or from whatever information it has available, where is this person and how close are these businesses? Strangely enough, Google even will showcase businesses where distance arguably doesn't really matter that much. So if I'm looking for a personal injury attorney, for example, I definitely don't care if the attorney is a block away or a mile away, as long as they're the best attorney. But even so, Google's going to tend to prioritize the attorneys that are closer to me because they have this kind of one size fits all attitude about businesses. And so proximity matters for all business types. And then the second one is relevance. So that factor basically just means, is this really a personal injury attorney? And what evidence can I find that tells me that? So does the business name say that? Does the primary category say, that would be the main place you would look? Do the secondary categories indicate that? Or more and more, Google is actually looking for relevant signals in other places. One really big place that they're looking for relevant signals these days is reviews. So, for example, I had a post recently where I was writing about when you're searching for restaurants near me, a business might have the primary category of cafe, but some cafes are really more restaurants, not coffee shops, right? And so Google is going to pull a snippet from a review that says, this is a great restaurant, and they're going to put the restaurant word in bold, and that's going to reinforce for me that this is a relevant result. And sometimes relevance is more about the long tail. So if I'm searching for something very specific, classic local SEO example is pet-friendly hotel, right? A hotel where I can bring my dog, for example. So a pet-friendly hotel is not something that's going to be identified by the primary category. It's just going to say hotel or whatever. But the reviews might say, this place is very pet-friendly. And then that boldface term is going to show up in a review snippet, again, reinforcing this result is relevant to me. So Google really wants to make that connection between the right business and the consumer's very specific need. And then the third component is prominence. And prominence basically means, so if proximity is how close is this business to me, if relevance is how is this the right match for the thing that I'm searching for, whether general or very specific. Prominence just basically means, is this a good example of this type of business, right? So the primary drivers of prominence are going to be a high average review rating, a great number of reviews. Actually, studies have shown that average rating is less of a determination of high ranking than review volume is, which is kind of odd, but it's partly because there's a lot of inflation in review ratings on Google these days. Everybody's got a 4.0, so it kind of equates to, doesn't really differentiate the businesses very well. So if two otherwise equal businesses both have the same like 4.0 star rating, but one of them has 300 reviews and the other one only has 4, then you're going to favor the one that has 300. So that volume is a strong signal as well. But Google says that they look at lots of other sources for prominence. In fact, they even look at the actual amount of time that the business has been around, if they can find that information. Other mentions of the business in other places online. This is partly where citations still kind of have an indirect influence on ranking. Sentiment as expressed in the content of reviews. And other things that the prominent signal is a little bit more mysterious and people don't know as much about it. But those are kind of the main drivers of local SEO. And again, those things are very specific to local. They don't work the same way when it comes to general organic search. And one of the reasons that we know that the algorithms are completely divorced or separate from each other is because they're updated on different cycles. So the Google core algorithm gets updated on a semi-regular basis and usually comes alongside an announcement from Google, hey, we had this, May core algorithm update. And everybody gets excited about whether their rankings went up or down. But the local algorithm is updated on a different schedule. It doesn't happen as often. The last major local algorithm update was last November, December. And the effects are completely different. So it's just a different, although closely linked to each other, they are different universes.
Mm-hmm. You remind me a French movie, Taxi. When the policeman asked a driver, "Can you tell more about Mercedes-Benz?" And he replied, "I'm not expert in Mercedes-Benz because I know about Ferrari." And after that, shared a huge list of features of Mercedes-Benz. And you're on the same boat. I'm not good with local SEO, but you shared a lot of insights that many experts can't do it. Thanks. Yeah, it's
Over
totally
time
valuable.
you get to know these things. The other things that you get to know are the things you shouldn't ever speculate on, because people will jump on you and tell you that you don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Ranking factors is a really big one. There was a kind of like a very controversial moment. I guess it's a couple of years ago now, when in that same help document that I was just talking about, where Google talks about distance, relevance, and prominence, they also have a list of things you should do in order to rank better in local searches. And so they say, make sure you claim your all of your profiles, kind of an obvious thing to do, because if you don't claim or verify your Google profiles, you cannot do anything to change the content, right? So you have to claim them, you have to fill them out as completely as possible. The Darren Shaw White Spark report, local search ranking factors, which was its latest edition, came out also toward the end of last year, around the same time as the algorithm update, said again that Google business profile optimization itself is the single biggest ranking factor in local. So that really aligns with what Google says you should do, which is fill out all this information. They say you should share photos. They say you should, in a recent update to that page, they said that you should list your products that you sell. So they give these specific kind of recommendations. And again, at one point a couple of years ago, they added to that list that you should fill out your merchant description, which is like a little paragraph that describes what kind of business you are, what differentiates you from the competition. And the local SEO community went like crazy, and they said, we've tested this. This does not drive improvements in ranking. And they actually shamed Google into taking that recommendation out of the page. So people take these things very seriously. You have to be careful what you say is actually a ranking factor or not, because there's a lot of testing and trying different things out. And, people have a good handle on those things these days.
Yeah, it often depends. If something
Yeah.
works for one project, it doesn't mean that it will work everywhere. So yeah, it depends. It's better
Yes.
to consider your preferences. Okay, let's get back to the main topic: building innovative products. Can you tell where to start? For example, if I have interesting idea and wanna build a new product to change the market, where to start? How to learn about innovative products? How do I know that my product will compete in the market, and how to consider a buying persona with that?
Yeah, well, you want to look where the opportunity or the problem is, the most sticky or difficult to solve through anything other than technology. I know that, in simplistic terms, but I think this is always a powerful statement that one of the founders of Twitter said several years ago, that if you want to build a successful internet company, you have to look at a thing that people have always wanted to do, some basic human need, and look at the way it's being fulfilled right now, and try to remove steps from the equation. Make it easier, remove friction, right? And so that's a obvious illustration of that is something like Uber, where it took a little bit of insight and creativity and inspiration to notice that the taxi system was, as they say in internet world, broken, right? Taxis were broken somehow. Well, not as efficient as they could be. They weren't highly inefficient, but you had to call one, you had to wait for it, you didn't know when it was going to come. You had to carry some form of payment with you. How many of those steps can we take out of the equation to make it smoother? And if you do that successfully, then you're going to have a huge sea change in the world. Not all product innovations involve complete sea changes. Sometimes it's a little more subtle than that. But if you look at an example in our space, which is nowadays, I would say, a little bit out of date, but it can be illustrative because it shows how someone took a look at the market and overturned the thinking about it. Looked at it from a new angle that hadn't been applied before. So in the days of universal business listing, where I was talking about, we basically we had a business, fill out a form, and then we collected all of their information, and then we sent it in a spreadsheet to these data aggregator companies who then published things out to the internet. And it was kind of sometimes they call it spray and pray, which basically means you send it out a bunch of places and then you hope for the best, but there's not really any evidence of success. We weren't often able to demonstrate that the listings were actually published because it takes a long time, and because the publishers don't want to acknowledge that they're working with the data aggregators. So it was successful up to a point, but there was a lot of unsolved problems, and you were going to reach a point where the market wasn't going to really support additional growth, because some businesses are going to start to ask you for proof that you did what you said you were going to do, and we couldn't provide that proof, right? So Yext came along. They had the idea that if they could control the way that data was syndicated so that they were in charge of when it happened, if they could make those updates real time or as close to real time as possible, and if they could provide objective proof that the update actually occurred, then they could take that market and make a leap, sort of a leap to the next stage of thinking. And so they created this network called Power Listings. It required a lot of money and a lot of technical innovation and a lot of other factors to actually make it happen. But what they did was they were the first company, to give them credit, to create broad-based API connections to all of the publishers in local that mattered at that time. They had a hard time getting into Google, but all of the let's say secondary ones, Yahoo and Bing and Foursquare and lots of other sites like that, City Search, ones that we don't really think of now as important, but they were at the time. And through those direct API connections, they were able to say, I'm going to change your phone number over here in our platform. I'm going to hit publish, and then I'm going to refresh the Foursquare profile for your business, and there's that phone number updated. It sounds kind of small, but I was on stage when I was not on stage. I was in the audience when they demonstrated this on stage for the first time, and everybody went, wow, you can do that. and so for the time, that idea of you're not spraying and praying anymore, you're controlling the syndication of the data and showing it to the buyer, that was very powerful. And they were able to do an IPO on the basis of having solved that problem. I would argue that citation building is not the way to solve today's local search problems, because again, all of these 80 or so, however many directories that are in those kinds of networks, most of them don't get any consumer traffic anymore. The market has consolidated to only about 5 or 6 platforms, with Google being the big one that really matter. But it's innovation like that sees the way things are working today, that recognizes that there's friction in the process, and that sort of uses creativity and inspiration to leap over what has been done before. That's really where you find the most dramatic kinds of success. Again, like I say, there's more subtle examples. You can solve smaller problems and still be successful.
Yeah, love it. So valuable. Can you tell, for example, I remember when Jeff Bezos shares about that many businesses are obsessed about competition, but Amazon is obsessed about customers. Can you tell where to be obsessed? I don't know. Or because for example, I often see when many projects are looking for getting insights from the average data, online studies, tools, and they don't care about some unique data, for example, to learn from social media, specific groups, to learn real pain points that we have today. And many great businesses learn this data, first part data, not only the average data. Can you tell how to find this way of learning data and be obsessed about customers?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of things I can think of that are very interesting there, and I think the experiences that we had going through the pandemic were really eye-opening in terms of what we do and the impact that it has on ordinary consumers that we hadn't really been as aware of before. In SEO, you tend to get very geeky about things, and you're thinking about them from the point of view of, again, data, but not the people behind the data, techniques, but not the meaning behind the technique. Does this move the needle when you're looking in Ahrefs or you're looking in SEMrush or whatever your tool is, rather than how does this impact actual human beings in the world, right? But it does have an impact. And so for local, it's become so ubiquitous as the way people find information about everything that they need that when the pandemic occurred and there was a break in that process and things weren't as available as they had been before, or when the needs that people had became more urgent, then you really saw where the cracks were in the process, where the seams started to show up, right? So we had, for example, one of our verticals that we do a lot of work in is groceries, which, grocery store brands. So we have several clients in that industry. And when the pandemic occurred, they were aware that there were certain sensitive populations, like seniors, older people, as well as people with health issues, compromised immune systems. And those people didn't want to be in crowds, right? And they wanted to be able to shop at times that were safer for them. And so a grocery store client of ours had a great idea that they should begin scheduling early shopping hours that were only for seniors and people with health issues. So the first hour of the day, like 7 to 8 in the morning, was set aside just for those people. It was a great idea, but they had a communication problem. So there was no way to publish this information within local search. You couldn't publish it to your Google profile. There was no good field for this. You just had your hours of operation, or if it was Christmas, you could list different hours. But other than that, you had no options. Nothing on Yelp, nothing on Facebook. And so people would come to the store, they would see the sign that says, special shopping hours, and they would complain. Why did I not know about this? Why didn't you tell me about this online? And the store manager would say, well, we published the information on our website. And the senior, person who didn't see that, they would say, well, we don't look at your website, we look at Google. And so this was a real sign of breakage, right? This was a missed opportunity, something that you could arguably say a lot of these things could have been thought of before, but they just didn't. And the urgency behind it was a thing that we didn't anticipate either. And so, we, along with several other companies who were experiencing these same kinds of things, we were able to advocate with Google, hey, you really need to create a field for this. And so they did. It took them a couple of months to gather all the inputs and figure out how they were going to do it. But they introduced a field called more hours, which is like secondary hours. And it allows you to specify that you have these safe shopping hours, along with other things that they might have wanted to do all along, like, do you have different hours of operation for your drive-through window than for your normal store, that kind of thing. So they introduced other improvements along with those. So but it was the human impact that really came, that was really made clear to us. Another thing that we do that kind of illustrates that there are humans behind the data that really make things come alive is reviews. So, consumers leave hundreds of reviews for local businesses, and some businesses, if they already have a really strong customer service culture, like we work with some restaurant chains that are really known for being, putting customer care like at the forefront of their priorities. They will be very conscientious about reading all of their reviews, writing responses or replies to their reviews, reaching out when people have a bad experience to offer them, a free meal item the next time they come to the restaurant, or whatever the case might be. So there are certain kind of cultures where you don't have to talk them into paying attention to reviews. They already know that this is an important channel for them. But there are others, like, let's say, discount retailers. They don't care about their reviews. They don't read them. They know they're bad. Their average ratings are typically 3 stars, maybe below that even. And they don't think it's important because they have a mindset which says, we're a low margin business, high volume, low margin. Everybody knows that our floors are kind of dirty, and our staff is not very nice, but they come there
Mhm.
because things are cheap, and if we keep driving that, we'll be successful, right? So
Mhm.
I had a conversation a couple of years ago with one of these discount store people, and we were trying to sell them on, you need to pay attention to your reviews. This is something every business should do. And finally, the executive we were talking to, he said, look, we know that, again, we know our floors are dirty. We know our managers are rude. We know our bathrooms are dirty. We know all of these things. We don't really care about that. But if you could tell me that the shelves are empty, I would care about that. Right? Because then you're not selling a product, right? And so reviews are a signal of many different things. And no matter what brand you are, you're going to find the angle where that information is going to be valuable to you. I would argue that brands should do more to make customers actually happy. But again, if your priority is just selling product, then reviews are going to show you when that's not working well, or they're going to show you when specific products are winning out in terms of consumer sentiment over others, and they'll even tell you why. So that sort of approach to this huge source of unstructured data, as long as you're analyzing it from the right perspective and looking for the right kinds of things that drive the bottom line for your business, you're going to find that information there.
Yeah, I remember when Bill Gates said that negative reviews are the best tool to develop your products or
Yeah.
innovate products. Yeah, and 95% of customers read reviews before buying products. So if
Yep.
you have negative reviews, a lot of them, it's better to fix. And I like your insights how to do it, to provide, I don't know, like extra free lunch or something similar. Yeah, why not? So if you can decide, uh, take away this feeling. And I found that in one study, 30% of customers can replace negative review with positive review if you decide their problems.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's Yelp's study. Yes, and they also
Mhm.
say that 30% will write a better review, but you have to respond quickly. You have to
Yeah.
respond within like 24 to 48 hours in order to make that happen. Yeah.
Mhm.
That's another thing that brands are really challenged to do. They don't get around to it quickly enough, and there's a lot of things about consumer sentiment. Another big topic these days is how should brands address social issues, because there are so many things that are in the news right now that people are concerned about, and the younger consumers especially want brands. All the studies say that they want brands to speak out, they want brands to have a voice on those topics, and there's a lot of challenge in doing that the right way, because if you do it in a way that seems like you're just capitalizing on the issue, you can do more harm than good. But these are all examples. We tend to think of things at this micro local level, but even at the national level and in between, there are all of these things about consumer expectations that brands really need to be alert to, in order to meet them, or else somebody else is going to do a better job and they're going to lose out as a result.
Love it, love it. Can you tell, for example, if you started today from scratch without any experience, skills, what will you do to learn more about building innovative brands? For example, if someone wanna jump on this field or help others, to sell the services, consultancy, what will you do to learn more about that?
Yeah, well, if we're talking about the specific industry that I work in, I mean, I'm a big fan of the stuff that Ahrefs produces, actually, or
Mhm.
SEMrush, but also Moz. Moz is a terrific source. I would think of Miriam Ellis and other writers at Moz who write lots of kind of basic guidelines for local businesses to understand SEO. And if you're trying to understand local SEO from a marketer or from a product development perspective, you really want to know that industry well. It's easy to make assumptions that are then incorrect, like I was talking about ranking factors that people think may be the case, but they really aren't. You really want to understand all of those pitfalls and ins and outs of any industry that you're diving into. Local SEO just happens to be the one that I live in day to day. But no matter what it is, you want to have a pretty strong sense of, what those priorities are, what matters within that space. But I think it's also important to approach things from the perspective of a normal human being. So you want to think also as a consumer, what are my needs and what are my frustrations? I think there's plenty of things. One example of a problem that was only just recently solved by Apple Maps, for example, was to be able to plan multiple stops on a route. You would think they would have solved that problem a long time ago. Google did solve that problem a long time ago, but Apple is only just catching up with the idea that if I'm planning a trip from one city to another, I might want to plan stops along the way. And if so, I should be able to have a route that, or a navigation system that accommodates that. And that's the kind of frustration that as a user of the product, you should be able to, infer that more people than just you are going to want a certain kind of a feature, right? And then, of course, you want to test that, right? So you want to test it through, you're talking about negative reviews as great feedback for product innovation. Well, if you don't have a mechanism to ask for that kind of feedback, then you're going to miss out on what consumers will tell you. So you might think you have the best idea in the world, but when you get market feedback, whether it's from your selective customer base, whether it's done through interviews, which can be very informative, or whether it's more data driven, A/B testing, that kind of feedback is going to tell you that your really good idea does or doesn't resonate for various reasons. And it might be because it doesn't make sense to people. It might be because there are steps that you've missed. It might be because it's too buggy. There are so many different reasons. But yeah, you definitely want to solicit that feedback. I believe for sure in the methodology of lean development, agile, iterative, where you should be shipping things and then figuring out what's wrong with them. But if you don't do the second half of that, which is constant iteration based on the feedback you're receiving, then you're really missing out on the benefit, which is that people in using your products will tell you how to make them better.
By the way, Apple has a lot of negative reviews about Apple Maps, and I remember when I've learned that in Australia, in many hotels, travelers got the message: don't use Apple Maps because in Australia we have alligators, lions, many other wild animals. If you go to the desert or jungle, it's hard to save you. If you are using Apple Maps, so it's better to use Google Maps. But I think Apple can learn from that to improve.
Well, here's the thing. And Apple is an interesting example, aren't they? Because they have a stellar reputation as a hardware company, as a company that creates physical products that might have digital things on them, but it's the product itself that's really the star. And they're so good at that. But every company has a weak point. And for Apple, the weak point is data-driven services. They don't really think of themselves as a company that focuses on services as much. And therefore, when they first launched Apple Maps, it's a fascinating story. I've known a couple of people who were involved in that process. When they launched it, they said, well, we're not a data company. We're going to create a great navigation interface, and then we're going to just go get data from somewhere, and it's going to be good enough. And after all, that's what Google did. And we don't remember that in the early days of Google Maps, people used to be led astray into the forest and get lost. It was in the news at the time, I remember. But that was ancient history now, because they've done such a good job at that iterative improvement that now we don't remember those things. Apple, unfortunately, they made a big splash with the first release of Apple Maps, and it was so bad because they had neglected the data layer and thought it would just take care of itself, that they're still trying to get out from under that bad reputation that was created. If you actually try to use Apple Maps today, it's much better than it used to be. I don't think you're going to die from an alligator attack in Australia anymore, because they really have improved it, but they made a mistake. They underestimated the complexity of what they were trying to do. And you
Mhm.
can see how that can really hurt you if you don't. And the other thing that they did was they didn't move fast enough to fix it, and so they
Mhm.
ended up creating an impression that is still kind of hanging around. But yeah, I wouldn't discourage anybody from using Apple Maps anymore. I think they're doing okay.
Yeah, we have other quote about that. If you launch a product and everyone is satisfied with your product, that means you launch so late this product. So it's better to launch and learn from negative reviews and think how you can improve it than
Yep.
to waste some time and develop, innovate. And I think you mentioned that all companies have their weak side. I remember when Google failed with Google Plus. Yeah, we know about that
Oh yeah,
because they are not good with social media. They are good
they're not
with
a
search
social company.
engines.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I think Apple has many failures. Facebook has them, so it's part
Right.
of the game, from the big
Right.
companies. And by the way, Apple is going to launch search engines. Yeah, we will see.
We
Interesting
will
about that.
see. So Robert Scoble, the tech blogger, he leaked that they were going to announce that at the WWDC this year, and then they didn't. But
Hmm.
he did say that he had sources that said that there was going to be a search engine. The question is, what kind of a search engine? Um, because the news seems to be related to Siri as a voice interface. And
Hmm.
there already is some kind of search going on in the iPhone when you do like spotlight search, or you can search using Siri, where they bring in, it's called federated search, which basically means you're pulling in search results from different kinds of sources. So it might be from your contact list, it might be from the apps installed on your phone, or it might be from the web, right? So that's federated. It's like, threading together all these different channels of search. And their web results are based on Bing, I believe. And so no, I'm sorry, it's Google. Of course it's Google. Google pays them a lot of money
Hmm.
for that. Uh, um, so anyway, Google is the source of the web results, but the question is whether they might want to replace just that one part. It wouldn't be very conspicuous unless they launched like a public standalone search engine. Uh,
Hmm.
so it's possible, but I think it's going to be very, very Apple like, in the sense that it's going to be embedded with other services, not
Hmm.
a standalone product. It's hard to imagine that they would launch anything like that.
Yeah, you will see. By the way, Google pays $15 billion to Apple to
Yeah,
be as a default search engine, and
yeah,
it's 10% of all Google revenue is coming to Apple just to be as a default in the search engine. So interesting
yes.
how Apple can lose such money now with their search engine.
I
uh,
mean, if anybody can afford it, it's Apple. and
yeah, yeah, totally.
and Apple wants to provide the best customer experience on the planet, and they know that for search that means Google.
Hmm.
And if they're going to replace it, they better replace it with something that's very, very good. So I can see all those drivers factoring into their thinking. And that's why I'll believe it when I see it, but it's hard to imagine what kind of form it would take. Again, I
Hmm.
think you're right that companies have learned by making errors in strategic judgment, that they shouldn't stray too far outside of their lane. Or if they
Hmm.
do it, they have to earn it kind of over time. Like you see Facebook going from the old, what we would now call an old-fashioned social network that's based on basically, text communication between people you've explicitly established a connection with. Then they purchased Instagram in order to own the photo-based version of social. And now they're copying TikTok and Snapchat, but mostly TikTok, in order to try to gain market share in the video version of social. But every time they make a move like that, it's very kind of like strategically aligned. It's like a steps in a process that you can track. And therefore it's more than likely going to be at least relatively successful. Whereas when
Hmm.
Google tries to invent a social network out of nothing, there's no basis for believing that it's going to succeed, and it doesn't. Google Plus is a great failure, but and something that I doubt they will ever try to do again. Because
Mhm.
they, you know,
Yeah, yeah. By the way, I check out features on Google Plus. They were great, but I think, of course, I'm not big expert of that, but I think Google didn't consider that it's hard to change habits, of
yeah.
people, because they have habits to use some features, and most people love to stay with some habits, with some features that Facebook, Instagram, other social media have. So yeah,
Well, they
we
also
will see.
they tried to force people to use Google Plus by making you have a Google Plus account in order to use YouTube. They tried to
Mhm,
consolidate everything into one account management system in order to use Gmail. I don't remember all the different ins and outs, but there in local it was a big mess. During that era of the Google Plus era, there was Google Places was the local platform. It still kind
mhm,
of existed alongside Google Plus, but there was this other thing called Google Plus Local, where your business could have like a social profile as well as a places profile, and they sort of overlapped each other and they sort of didn't. And in order for somebody to review you, they had to have a Google Plus account, and it was just so convoluted. It was like doomed from the start. You could tell it was never going to work. But
mhm,
partly the mistake that they made, and this is another, this is a ancient history now, but it illustrates one of the things that one shouldn't do is don't put up as few paywalls as possible, put up as few gates as possible, as few restrictions as possible. You want to invite people to do something that's easy for them to do, not make their life harder in order to somehow gain the value of this new thing that you're presenting to them. And there were way too many restrictions in order to use the thing at all.
mhm. Yeah, love it, love it. By the way, iChirafs launched their search engine. It's called Yep.
I heard
It's
about that,
interesting.
and they spent, was it $40 million or something like that to. I
Oh,
actually
60 million. Yeah.
yeah, that right. I had an article recently on Street Fight, which I write a column regularly for, which was about alternative search engines and will there be a search engine that will finally erode Google's market share? And again, I'm interested in this from a local perspective because I think
Mhm,
there's opportunity to be innovative in local and think of things that Google hasn't thought of. And there's no again, if you look at TikTok and the way that they have posed a threat to Facebook, the analogy is clear. There's going to be a point on the horizon at someday when Google will be threatened by someone who has an innovation that is stronger than anything that Google can easily replicate. It's
mhm,
just a matter of when and who and what is that going to be. But when it comes to general search, there is, I guess, DuckDuckGo's usage has recently started to decline, but they were on a pretty strong growth trajectory for the last several years because of
mhm,
privacy, right? And so
mhm,
privacy can be an angle, but there are many alternate search engines out there that some of them are relatively popular. Another common theme is support for charitable causes. So there are search engines where every search helps to donate money to save the oceans or environmental causes and various things. Um, those are kind of niche, like they're kind of guaranteed maybe to be niche, but there's going to be something else that's TikTok like that just turns it on its head, that approaches search from a different perspective. One thing I know is at least possible is that the same kind of visual first, mobile first orientation that made TikTok and Snapchat so successful could be applied to search. And I think that Google already knows that that threat exists, which is why they're investing so much in development of Google Lens as a way to search the internet, not just as, take a picture of a flower and find out what kind of flower it is, but as an actual entry point to search. And of course, AR and VR could also be entry points to search. Just point your phone to the world around you and interact with search content as a result. But Google's going to approach it from a perspective that is still somehow, that you cannot ever move beyond your origins entirely, right? And Google was in 1997 or 8, right? And so they're old news in some ways. It's just that we don't yet know exactly what that new innovative point of view is going to be. But the fact that there will be one, I think, is inevitable.
Yeah, exactly. Damian, it's a big pleasure to get on my show, to learn from you. You share a lot of valuable insights. Tell our audience how they can reach out to you, learn more about you, follow you.
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Damian Rollison. You can find out more about my company at meetsoci.com. That's meetsoci.com.
Okay, guys, you can find all these links in the description below. Follow Damian on Twitter because you can see a lot of valuable insights. You can get a lot more just simply following. Thanks again. It's a big pleasure. Welcome back anytime to share more value with my audience. Guys, you can find all these links in the description below. Listen us on Apple, Google, Spotify, and see you next time.
All right. Thank you.